I'm trying to adjust my life here.
Some nights I'm having a hard time keeping my head above the water. Cold breath I cannot stand up to.
Okay. By the way, everybody, this is Jennifer. This is first model. Oh,
So you have a day ahead of you, eh?
just another one.
Just another one. Okay.
Little bit. Yeah.
Yes.
Morning into afternoon. Okay, I'm ready to go.
I'm ready.
Excellent. All right, everyone. I'm Bailey. I work at the Fraser location. It's nice to meet you. So before we get started, I figured I'd just kind of go over what my philosophy around hair cutting is and why I do things the way I do. I trained under somebody that was like a Sassoon platform artist, and so a lot of the hair cutting that I was trained to do is like very, very structured, very blunt, very heavy, and I love the way it looks, but I always found it was very, very impractical in that like it doesn't really look like that when it's not styled at home, or when it's styled at home, and I find that the grow out rate of those haircuts are just so poor. My kind of like challenge to myself is to see if I can get a haircut to last as long as possible. I know it's kind of a common thing for hairstylists to be like, oh, if I just get them back in my chair as soon as possible, it'll be great. But I'm like, I just want to have as many clients as possible. So the less I see them, the more they'll talk about how great the haircut grew out. So basically what I have done is I believe in like the structure of a Sassoon cut. I feel like having that like precise baseline in there is necessary to house all the texturizing that I do. So basically what I do is when the hair is wet, I go in and just lay in a really nice blunt haircut, and then I dry it, and then once it's dry, I usually texturize in 3 different ways. I never use texturizing shears. I'll show you those techniques today, but basically I'm all about like movement and airiness, and I find that by taking weight out in the necessary areas, you can actually prolong haircuts to the point that like, how often do I cut your hair?
Well, exactly every 3 months actually.
Every 3 months, and she gets like a pretty nice bob. So it's, yeah, it's kind of my thing. So another thing that I'm known for is bangs. So she already has bangs, so we're just gonna do, you get to watch me be extremely anal and just get those bangs really nice and blunt. I always talk about this bang moment that happens where if you are patient and precise enough, eventually you're gonna look at them and be like, they're perfect, that's fine. So it just takes a little bit of anal retentiveness, but it is totally worth it. And then my next model that's coming in, she actually doesn't have bangs right now, but we're gonna give her bangs, and I'm just gonna talk about sectioning and that type of thing, and then just do like a really nice beachy texturized layered cut. So yeah.
So the anal piece about the bangs is the reason why I go to her. Okay? I, you know, like I'm in my uneducated way, I'm like, oh, bangs are easy, right? Man, I went through lots and lots of like, this isn't right, and I would come back like a few days or a week later, like this isn't quite right. So, and then I found this one.
Bang Nazi. Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'll just get her washed and get started, and then as we're kind of going through the haircut, I'll tell you why I'm doing things, and if you have any questions during the process, we can totally talk about them. Yeah, let's get you washed.
Awesome.
I also need a cape. I forgot to grab one.
Oh, yeah.
Bring you this way. I'll try and do this so everyone can see, and if you can, just... Again, being the anal person I am, I always like to kind of try and get the bangs as natural as possible, so then if they air dry, they're not going to get any weird bends or kinks in them or anything. So for this part of the haircut, I always just like to do a pretty standard bob. I tend to not do any layering, even if they want that kind of beveled edge. I don't really do any layering when it's wet. I find layering it too much when it's wet ends up giving you that like mom bob that you end up trying to fight with texturizing. So usually what I'll do is just kind of lay the groundwork in when it's wet, and then once it's dry, I'll go in and do, which I'll show you, some like undercutting and texturizing techniques to give it the appearance of a bevel without actually having all of the weight of like the classic bob. And basically for sectioning, you can tell, split it in half, split it over the ears, get clips prepared. I didn't do, but that's okay. My dear, I'm gonna get you to look down for me. Just in terms of tools, I know we all know about scissors, but usually when I'm doing precision, I like to use my smaller ones, and then when I'm doing texturizing, I use my bigger ones. I find that gets you in there a little bit easier. So basically, start with a nice clean line.
You're pushing it right against the neck?
Yeah, I find for that gives me the most control and the most precision. I find like holding your comb like this and trying to like get the line like that, you almost end up fighting these tiny little corners because like the roundness of the head, you're always kind of trying to overcompensate for that. So I'll usually just press it against her head and then get that line nice and tidy that way.
And are you combing it straight down or combing it kind of into the middle?
I'm basically combing it along the curve of her head. Okay. So instead of trying to like into everything I do, I tend to do with the rounds of the head. So I'll pull straight down here, and then here it's almost at an angle, just because that's kind of where her neck rounds. So basically just trying to get that like as clean and smooth as possible. And I never really worry about these little baby hairs right now.
And when you say, do you have the client bend their head forward pretty much the whole time during the back, or when do you kind of,
Yeah, usually. If they want something that doesn't have any bevel whatsoever, usually once I get above the occipital, I'll ask them to raise their head, so then this layer is going to be the same length as the base layer. But in her case, because I do like a little bit of that bevel in there, I'll just keep her head down until I get to the crown.
and that will just kind of naturally create a bevel?
Yeah, it gives it that like tiny little bevel that prevents it from getting that like the broom. Yes, totally. Yeah, the flick out is never fun.
For sectioning at the beginning, if you had somebody that didn't have a center part, would you go off of their normal parting?
Yeah, usually what I do is just kind of figure out where their part is. If they like to change it at all, I'll cut it in the center. But if they're like, nope, this is my part, this is where it is, basically instead of carrying the parting all the way to the back of their crown, I'll usually part it to about where their hair naturally wants to fall. Let that split, use that as the guide to section over the ears, and then just keep the weight kind of where it naturally lies with their part. I always laugh when people watch me do haircuts at this stage because it's just so, it looks so basic that I'm like, yeah, it's a nice clean bulb.
So Bailey, just for video purposes, are you able to kind of talk through some of the techniques? I know
Yes.
these guys probably are kind of understanding what's going on, but like maybe explain some of the sectioning.
Oh, for sure. So basically right now I'm just sectioning everything in natural fall, not using any graduation whatsoever, just pressing it against her head and trying to get that line as nice and clean as possible. And all I'm really doing is taking, I guess, 4 sections to get that back finished. And yeah, it's just combing everything straight back. If at this point, if somebody has either like a double crown or a cowlick or something that's very prominent, I always like to part kind of on that so that you can see where the hair wants to fall. Otherwise what'll happen is like, let me see, she's got a little cowlick here. So if I say was to not take into consideration that cowlick and pull this down a lot, if I cut it, as soon as that dries, that's gonna jump and then you're gonna get this bend in the actual line. So usually at this point, what I'll do is I won't use as much tension and I'll just kind of try and let it be as natural as possible, keeping in mind that you can always make changes when it's dried, and then just very gently pull that down and just kind of snip up any remaining pieces there. And then I know it's very common when doing bobs and stuff at this point in the game, if you're getting anything that looks like this or it looks like it's starting to fight with you, I wouldn't even worry about that when it's wet because that can all be corrected when it's dried and you're texturizing. If you had someone that you noticed it was happening a lot, the reason that this happens besides like natural texture is that this stuff under here wants to stick out. In her case, because she does have quite a few of these little baby hairs and that's probably what's making it jump, what you can do is just kind of press them down and right where you can see it's actually jumping up, just go in and take that out. And it's not gonna do anything to the shape, but it's just gonna allow it to lay a little bit cleaner.
Are there any hair textures that just straight up you would say, don't do this haircut on?
Nope. I basically find like even if somebody has really curly hair, I mean, curly hair I cut entirely differently, so maybe like that would be the exception. You can still do this haircut on somebody with curly hair, but it would basically be utilizing an entirely different technique to get the same end result. But even if somebody's got waves or anything that's a little bit less forgiving than Jennifer's amazing hair, you can basically just get that structure in, and then once it's dry and the texture starts to come out, that's where you can kind of see what needs to be taken out to make it just basically an easy haircut for them to deal with at home. So now I'm basically just coming around the ears, doing slight diagonal forward. I don't want to have the like, you know, the 90s like whoosh, But I always find, even if I'm guilty of this, even when people tell me they want the full-on straight across,
I always leave the
yeah,
empty corner. Yeah.
totally. Just, I love the way it looks when it just slightly comes around. They won't be any of the wiser, and it'll look like a better haircut.
Yeah.
So. So for this part, I'm going to use a little bit of tension, nothing crazy, and then just press over the ear to counter for that, because otherwise you're going to get that like ear dip that happens.
Can you explain that one more time? I feel like I struggle with that first.
Oh yeah, for sure. So basically what I'm doing is I don't like to pull this stuff down really tight. I don't like to push it into the head, but what I'll do is just kind of gently hold it like that, and then where it's over the ear, if you push it, that's gonna bump this up so you can get that nice straight line without actually having,
Right, because it's actually going to sit a little bit higher.
yeah, it does that little dip thing. So that just basically accounts for the ear. And then just basically follow that guide.
So I struggle with knowing if somebody tells me how long they want the front to sit.
Yep.
I struggle with estimating where to start in the back.
In the back? Okay. So usually when I come to that situation, say she wanted it to sit where it is, like say she wants it here. I always estimate, like, do you want it mostly straight across or do you want to have a bit of an angle? I find the majority of people, even if they want it kind of sitting above the shoulder, it's always better to have a slight bit of lift in the back. Otherwise, what happens is in 4 to 5 weeks, anything that you leave back here, especially underneath here, that's a little bit longer, it's gonna grow and do that like mushroom thing, where because everybody's hairline's like lower than here, all of that stuff grows out faster. So it's always better, even if you want to keep this stuff above it longer, take this stuff shorter, and then you're gonna prevent that like mushroom jump when people are like, my bob fell apart, what happened? But basically what I'll do is I try to think in terms of the, like a person's natural, what am I trying to say, biology, I guess. And so like if somebody has, say like a longer face and they want it like sitting above their shoulder, but their chin's kind of hanging out around their shoulder, you can basically just use their natural body as a guide. So like even if they want it straight across, I'd say like I never usually will leave a bob unless it's a lob longer than like above the top of their vertebrae here. I'll never really take it shorter than like where the occipital starts to cave in. Otherwise, you're going to start to need to do a lot of undercutting, and then that just grows out really poorly. But basically, I always just try to think of like visualizing where you want it to lie, how much angle they want, and then you can almost take a look at their chin. I should be doing this way so you can see. Take a look at like where you want it to lie, and then just visualize a nice clean line going up to the neck, and then you can use that as your guide to start.
If somebody has like a naturally like a super low hairline in the back, would you take that into account as to how short you go in the back?
Yeah, for sure. So if somebody is you know, the people where their hair kind of comes down all the way to here,
Yeah.
I'll either do one of two things. I'll ask them how long they want the haircut to last and how often they want to come back in. And if they're like, oh, I'll come back in like 4 to 6 weeks, then what I'll do is almost fake a hairline where I'll end up cutting it a little higher and then get rid of all of that. And then by the time it starts to shade in, they'll be in for a haircut. If they're like, oh, I'll come in a few months, I'll always leave it longer than their hairline.
Okay.
Yeah, then you're not fighting with like the baby hairs.
Yeah.
Hello. Another thing that is really, really common with pretty much every hairstylist that I've talked to, there's always going to be one side that you struggle with that's a little longer or a little bit heavier or a little something. So the best thing you can do is be aware of that. Another thing is don't worry about it until everything's dry. I've just seen it happen so much where like you're aware that you made one side a little longer, and especially, you know, you get those clients that are like, just don't worry about it, let it dry, because that will change everything. And then through texturizing and like looking in the mirror and playing with it, you can actually account for that mistake, as opposed to like, oh, we'll take it a little shorter when it's wet, and then looking at the other side and being like, we'll take that a little shorter, and then you just lose track of the length and people end up with shorter haircuts than they want. So when I get to the top section, usually what I'll do is just kind of push some stuff around to see where the hair wants to lay, because sometimes, you know, you'll leave this stuff longer, it'll flip to the back, and then you'll get stuff like this. So by just kind of playing with it and blending out your sectioning, that'll allow you to kind of see where the hair wants to naturally fall, and then you can account for that while you're cutting. Yeah, right there. And then again, as I did with the back, when you're in the top section, you don't really want to use a lot of tension and just kind of let the hair do its thing. If you pull too much on the top section, what's going to happen is you're going to end up getting, as soon as it's dry, you're going to get your baseline, and then the top layer is going to jump, and then you're going to get like tiny little stacks in your haircut, and then you're going to need to account for that as well later, which it's never fun trying to clean up your mess after you've made it. And then for this, I usually don't put any tension on. I just go in and just kind of tidy up that line. Okay. Let's see. Make sure your bangs are, yeah, they're getting there. Okay, so I'm gonna get her blow dried, and then I'll show you guys all the texturizing that I've been talking about so much. Does anybody have a Denman brush I can borrow?
I was like, oh.
Sweet. I always like to follow the shape of the head. So all I'm gonna do is kind of pull this like that and just use the shape of her head to give it a slight bevel. When it gets back here, I usually just kind of blow dry it like this, and then blow dry it like this, and basically just work around using the shape of her head to give it a bit of roundness without actually like putting a lot of effort into getting that like shape, because that again kind of dates the haircut a little bit. So by just naturally pulling it and playing with it with the round of the head, that'll give you a slight bevel, and yeah, it'll look good. Sure. It's my favorite. Oh, and the other thing is I always start with the bangs. And usually with bangs, because there are cowlicks and things to account for, I'll start by blowing them one way, blowing them another way. And that'll just ensure that all those little hairs are laying how they're supposed to.
Yeah, you need to be used to it.
Her particular one, or that brand? 'Cause I have that dryer too. Yeah.
Yeah, Megan, yeah, maybe
Oh, yay.
You get the double blow dry.
Yeah. I never used one of these. I have one bob cut. Huh? Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna stop before I mess it up too much.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Let it sped it up a little bit.
Thank you, thank you. Another thing that I do while I'm blow drying, this is my time to pay attention to weight, pay attention to anything that looks like it needs a bit of refining, see how their hair is naturally falling, and just try and like really analyze the next few steps that I'm gonna take. So, I mean, I always like to engage with my blow dry. Good to go?
Yeah.
Excellent. So you can see how like even by like not graduating it, it still has that nice smooth. It's all just from laying her head down. So usually what I do now is I like to think of my next plan of attack in 3 parts. First thing I do, because the structure is most important, I refine everything that I just did. So I basically go through and get them to do a little yoga with me. Refine, refine, refine. tilt like that. And then off to the side. This is a really common area for things like that. So always be aware of those little sneaky bits there. Yeah, those things that like as soon as you blow dry, you're like, I cut a straight line, what happened? And then we'll do off to this side. And then off over there. They're one of my favorites. There we go. All right. So again, I leave the bangs till last because they take me a very long time. But you can see like that is a structured bob that's going to grow out terribly. So my long shears, I have seen so many times that when hairstylists texturize, they pull it up and just kind of like take pieces out of the ends and they're like, it's texturized. I always think of it in 3 parts. I go through for the first time and I do texturize the ends because it's important. I'll show you kind of how I choose where I'm going to texturize. And then I'll go in and do some weight reduction and put in some movement. And then when that's all done, I'll actually go through and I'll show you, but I'll give you an example right now. If you can do this with anybody, any hair thickness or anything. If you take a thin section and hold it up, you can see where weight needs to be taken out. So for instance, there's like holes here, so you don't want to texturize that. That's why I don't use texturizing shears. If you just go in and texturize that, what's going to happen is all these little gaps in the hair, you're actually going to destroy the shape that you spent all that time putting in. So then what you can do is go in and start to take out weight where you need it, and then that's going to personalize the haircut and ensure that it grows out really well without taking any of the structure away from the bottom. So first things first, basically just go through, hold up the ends, and I just like to soften them a little bit. One of the most common things that I see with bobs all the time are this area. It gets very, very heavy. So I'll show you how to texturize that as well. But first things first, I just kind of hold it up and nip out some of that density.
And like fairly low elevation.
Yeah, basically all I'm doing is taking it and just flipping it like this, so you're not layering it really, you're just kind of seeing where this base of your haircut is, so you can just kind of take out some of the density of it. And again, right in here, that's pretty light, so I'm not going to texturize that. And I mean, I cut her hair quite a bit, so the ends don't need a ton of texture because I got a lot in there already. But just showing you the technique. Yeah, I always just like to go through and do some point cutting. And again, this is fine, so I'm not going to do that. But I always just take pivotal partings. If somebody's got really, really thick hair, I'll take them very, very thin. But for her, you can take them like an average thickness. I'd say like most people, you can end up taking like 1/2 inch to 1 inch, depending on. Pretty standard. There we go. Okay, now for the weight reduction. This to me is one of the most important things you can do. Again, as I mentioned, I tend to do everything following the curvature of the head. So I'm basically just, it's gonna look a little messy, but it works. I'm basically just gonna go in and follow the curve of her head. Even though we're doing a diagonal forward haircut, I actually take diagonal back sections because that's gonna let you into that area where it's really, really dense. If you follow this, you're gonna be fighting so much more with this. So it basically, I'll texturize the opposite way that I'm cutting. Yeah, for sure. And I'll do this side as well. Basically just kind of like that. So it's just kind of coming up around her occipital bone. So first things first. Okay, I'm like, yeah, for sure. Basically just like the rounds of the head. So now what I'll do is I'm just gonna go in and chip out oh, sorry. I'll just yank your head around. And again, not doing too much that it's actually going to destroy the texture of, or the shape of the haircut. Sorry, I'm just gonna fix that. But just going in and making sure there's movement there. Another one of my favorite techniques to do, especially in these two these two corner areas where it starts to get really dense, is I'll actually start to do a bit of undercutting, where if you take this up and pull it this way, and then just kind of brush your scissors through it, that's gonna take weight out and allow for everything to hang over top of it while not really destroying that base structure that you got in there. You can kind of do it all the way up the haircut, but do a little bit more in there. And then drop that stuff down. And this is where I'm gonna start pulling it around. So basically, I'm gonna do the same type of pivotal partings that I did when I was doing the point cutting on the ends, but I'm gonna do a slight angle, and I'm actually gonna start pulling it towards the center back of the head. And that's gonna ensure that even though we're texturizing, all the texturizing is still getting longer towards the front, so you don't ruin that angle that you have shaped. And just kind of go in and break that up. You can even comb it this way and following, again, curve of the head, just kind of bust out some of that weight. And with bobs, I usually will do that up until you hit about the occipital. You might notice that as I'm doing that, I kind of stop texturizing about there. And I start close and then work my way back so that all this is being undercut, but you're not losing the base structure that you have above there. So you're not basically like cutting your layers out, because if you do it where you pull it back and just texturize all the way up, all that's gonna do is create another layer that you're don't want to have. I'll do the same here. So I don't usually use that technique, like I said, above the occipital, because you need all of the density through here to actually finish off the bob. But now that I've done that, this is where I'm gonna go in and start playing with the weight. So again, this is gonna be a little bit of finer sections, and seeing like in the center here, she doesn't need a lot of texturizing, because if I do that, all of this stuff is just gonna disappear. But she can use a little bit out of there and a little bit out of there. And basically, it's like a more tedious way of using texturizing shears, but it ensures that you're not destroying your haircut.
Well, it's precise.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
And shirts with longer hair like this, it's not
Oh, definitely.
personal.
It's just like, oh, your dent's there, I'll take it
It's
out.
everywhere.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And then again, I kind of over direct when I do this so that your, as I mentioned, your texturizing is still getting longer towards the front. I usually get mine sharpened every 4 months, probably. But I do a lot of haircuts. And then once I'm done that, you are totally fine to leave it as is, and that's just gonna be like a really nice structured version of a pretty classic bob. Jennifer and I have been doing a little bit more texturizing just because we like it a little bit easier to manage and a little bit beachier. So what I'll do for that is, again, I'm basically gonna be following the curve of the head, taking sections along her part like this and pulling them forward. And what that's gonna do is allow me to do a bit of layering without it looking like layers. So I'm going to pull all this stuff forward and then just go in and break that up. And that is going to give it a bit more of an effortless feel. It'll be a little easier to style, and it'll also help it grow out a little bit longer. I'm a fan of layering in ways that don't look like layers, because I hate the way that traditional layers look. I feel like they look like broomy or like a Christmas tree. That's always a sad day. And another thing is I tend to be a very touchy hairstylist. I like to get my hands in there. It's really easy to feel where there's weight left over. So if you're pulling something and you're like, oh, this feels like it's moving nicely, and then there's just like a clump in there, like there is, you can basically just go in and utilize any number of texturizing techniques to just kind of break that up a bit. I'm gonna do my that, and then do that under here as well. And that just kind of lightens that up. So now you can see there's like layers and movement in there. It's a little bit more, I don't know, modern. And then this side doesn't have any, and it's still really nice, but it doesn't have the same type of ease that the other side does. I find nowadays a lot of people are very wash and wear, and the easier that you can make it on them, the better. So I always like to spend a lot of time actually cutting the hairstyle into their hair so they can basically like blow dry it, and if they want to put a little something in it to like give it some texture, they can.
What's your favorite go-to texture?
I am a huge fan of the Kevin Murphy dusting powder. I love that stuff. I also use, if I'm gonna blow dry, I'll put the Hair Resort cream in first, and that'll help give it a bit of texture. Another one that I really like to use is either Easy Rider or Night Rider. Oh, it's so good. Nice.
On any like wave set or anything.
Oh, for sure. It's such a good product.
I didn't really know what to use a lot of Kevin Murphy stuff for, so I just experimented with it.
Awesome. Yeah, it can take a little while to get used to. There's some weird stuff in there, but it's good.
I'm still kind of scared of hair resort then.
It's wonderful. It just, I always like to use it on wet hair because I find in dry hair it just clumps. And just like, I like to use it on people that naturally have a bit of texture in their hair, and then you don't have to blow dry 100%. You can just get it in and then like squish it around and it looks good. All right, so I'm just gonna do my thing over here and then we can get anal on her bangs. Oh yeah, now would be the time to, can you look down for me?
Do you use trimmers on the neck too, Billy?
Yeah.
Use that to remove line cutters.
Yeah, I basically just kind of like use that to clear it out, and then, does anyone have trimmers I can use? I forgot to bring mine. Sweet, thank you. Ooh. Put these down instead of poking you in the back of the head with them. Thank you. All right, bang time. Does anyone have any questions about this part before I move to the bangs? Okay. Thank you. All right, so she's got bangs, so when I do Sam's hair, I'm going to talk a little bit more about sectioning, but I'm going to quickly go over some of my biggest bang pet peeves that I see. I don't like it when anything in here should not be cut. Like, don't bring that into the bang. Another thing that I find is, especially on clients that have finer hair, I think people get scared to give them a thick bang, and so they end up just sectioning out little wisps, and that's always terrifying. But, okay, so another thing, don't ever just cut a bang like that. Like, let's do it in sections. Let's make it clean and nice. Whenever it's like, oh, I'll just give you a bang trim and do that, it's gonna get broomy, it's gonna jump around, it's gonna fight with you, it's gonna be nasty. So, basically, okay, I'm gonna tell you, I know her bangs really well, so I know how short to take them. But we usually do her bangs about here. I usually will ask someone like how long they wanna come in for a bang trim, if they're comfortable going short, if they want them, like just use any point of reference. Do you want it resting on your eyebrows, above your eyebrows? Do you want it in your forehead? Like anything like that. And another thing is it's always better to just do it 4 times until they get the length that they want than just be like, I got this, and then they hate you. So for her, usually what I do is I don't know how to explain how I use it as a guide, but I know where her bangs are. So I'm just gonna do it. But what I'll do is I'll hold my comb about where I want them.
One of my friends, when she raises her eyebrow, she has one forehead wrinkle, and that's where I cut her bangs trim. That's what I use as my guide.
You can totally use anything like that as a guide.
I was right about to offer that, because that's the benefit of bangs. I don't need to Botox my forehead.
Yep, for sure. And again, at this point, you don't really need to worry about it being like extremely precise. You just basically want to lay in that shape.
Bailey, do you ever tell people that because of their like cowlicks that it's just not in their best interest?
Rarely. I find there's ways to kind of work around cowlicks. If somebody's got a very, very strong cowlick, usually what I'll do, again, I will never, ever, ever cut bangs wet. But usually what I'll do is, and I tend not to put a lot of tension when I'm cutting bangs. I'll just let it kind of fall naturally, and then you can allow that cowlick to jump and then kind of cut around it, and then always leave it a little bit heavier, and that's going to help weigh it down as well. On the flip side, if somebody has one of those cowlicks that is really heavy but everything else is really fine, what you can do is take a section from underneath and just kind of point cut that out, and then this is going to jump, and then when that jumps, you let the layer over top rest on it, and that'll pull it up so you don't get that dip.
So never, ever cut it wet, even if you're giving someone bangs for the first time to remove length?
I'm gonna give her bangs for the first time, and I'm a total nerd, I'm sorry. I call it my Darth Vader helmet, and what I'll do is I'm just gonna pull them down and cut them super long and weird, and then that'll at least section them out, and then everything else I'll do dry. But I basically warn everyone I'm gonna give them a Vader helmet. And again, I'm not worrying too much if they're like slanting or if they're not straight, because we're just gonna lay in that shape and then we're gonna attack it from all angles. Another thing to take into consideration when you do section bangs like this is, you probably could tell, but the first cut that I did ended up looking short, but as you drop more layers down, it weighs it down and kind of presses it so it doesn't feel as short. But by doing it this way, you're also gonna end up with like short to long, and that's gonna give you a bit of a bevel again, so you don't get that like, yeah. Exactly. The nasty broom. That nasty bang broom. Okay. So now I'm just gonna stare at her for a moment. And this is where I just look at all the little imperfections. So I'd say like to here, we're pretty good. It starts to drift around and move around and it's a little longer here. So we're just gonna really, really slowly start working that out. And again, we're starting to get good in here, but then we're drifting through here. I know this side's a tad bit longer, so I'll take that out. And I definitely believe in working at bangs from both sides. Otherwise, you're just gonna end up pushing the hair to one side constantly, and then it's never gonna get straight.
What do you say to clients who come in and say, "You're gonna kill me, but I trim my own bangs"?
I'm just like, I'm not gonna kill you, just be prepared to sit here for a while I fix them.
Yeah, effectively, it's not my hair. I'm not the one walking around looking like that. So.
And then, I know they're not perfect yet, but what I usually do, because I get like laser focus where I just stare at them so much that I'm like, are they straight? Am I crazy? What's happening? So then, spin her around and assess from afar. And then shake your head a bit.
Right side looks a bit longer.
Yeah. So this is where you basically just start analyzing everything. Yeah, this side's a little longer. There's a slant. There's a little bit in there that needs to come out. So spin back around, give your eyes a rest, and then begin again. I also know it's quite common for people not to be as anal as Jen about her bangs, but that is not an excuse for you not to be as anal about their bangs. I don't believe that there's a moment where you should ever be like, man, it's good enough.
Until they're good enough.
Exactly, until you reach the bang moment, that precious moment. Yeah, you're like, nope, sorry, that's not.
I appreciate your vote of confidence, but I'm sorry you're wrong.
Another thing that's great about being this anal about bangs is that when people come in for bang trims, they actually feel like it's worth tipping you instead of just being like a 2-minute bang trim and then they're just like, nah, thanks. Thanks, bro. See you in a month.
Yeah, I spent a number of years like being that customer and demanding that my bangs be fixed in the first week, and after a while I just got tired of it and I just used like a set of clippers to take care of the imperfections at home.
Yeah, for sure. So this is where I get crazy. There's a little dip there and a little thing there, so we're just gonna continue. And again, because I cut them in layers, I always like to tilt my scissors slightly that way, and that's gonna continue the bevel so you're not cutting that like blunt line into it. But just kind of like, I never really go in like that. I always like this and that. And that's gonna get you that underneath layer that's usually the one that's not straight. And just kind of. It was really fun to do Jen's bangs when I worked in a salon that had so many shadows.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, tilt your head back. Is that a shadow or is that your hair? I have no idea, but we'll just keep cutting. I also joke about it with people because I like bangs to, when someone wants blunt bangs, I want them to look like they're cut out of paper. I want them to just be like so precise that it's like paper bang. So now what I'm gonna do is get you to shake your head, move around. Still like, yeah, that tiny little dip. Sorry, I'm not gonna spin her for this. And by getting them to like wiggle their head around and move around a whole bunch, you're just ensuring that when they wake up tomorrow morning, there's not gonna be like a, nobody likes a dangler in their face first thing in the morning. Anybody feel crazy yet?
Anyone giving us the side eye?
Like, this is insane. Give it a shake again. Let's see. Still that little.
I just find it crazy that we did not learn how to cut bangs once in school.
I know.
No, they don't teach you how to cut bangs in hair school.
Oh, you know what somebody taught me?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, do this, twist it, and cut it. And I'm like, oh yeah.
Oh, yeah, we got
Cool.
yeah. No, I mean, one was like trial and error.
Yeah, same.
Together things that learning for the first time, like how to actually.
Properly cut.
Is the right side still a little bit? Okay.
And what your outline should be, like where you should stop cutting bangs.
Shake it again.
Ah, yep. We have the same eye.
We do. One more shake. Sorry.
No, sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm hair crazy. Ah, bang moment. See? There's that moment when you're just like, ah, there it is. Okay, so. Oh, yeah. I'm gonna get you a towel.
And if there's any baby powder or something, that'd be great.
Do you guys have baby powder here? Or like talc or anything?
Or any kind of powder.
There's a dry shampoo cup. The second on the bottom shelf, there's a second little pop.
Second shelf left.
Second one in.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try that.
We don't have any.
There you go. And then I'll use this. I like messy hair. I like hair that doesn't look like it was just leaving the salon. So, sorry. All right. There's her haircut. So, thank you. Oh, let's see it without the cape because that always changes everything as well. But
And when it comes to the product, I'm just kind of humoring her because I use nothing in my video.
yeah, I'm just like, today I'm going to put product in your hair.